Hey book friends, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to a video where I chat about everything I read in February, which again is a lot of books. I'm not quite sure why. I'm not gonna really worry about it though. So let's just get into the 11 books that I read in February, plus one DNF. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel. Welcome back. All the things. Like I said, we're going to be chatting through all the books I read in February. I'm making another wrap-up video. I'm actually really enjoying making wrap-up videos. I think it's because I just have been loving the books I've been reading, except for a few, which maybe we'll just start with that because I have mostly 4 stars, 3 5 stars though, a couple 3 stars and a DNF. So maybe we'll start there with the DNF, which is a very popular book. You guys, it's a popular book. It is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. Okay, my mark is still there. I made it like halfway. And I was dreading reading it. It's a book I chose for my TBR game, so I have to read it. And I never like feeling like that. And a lot of times I will just decide to like fail at that TBR on purpose if I'm not feeling a book. But I was like, I feel like I would really like this. This is one of those books that 1, it's really popular. It's very beloved. 2, it's about science. And I tend to really like books about science. Now, before I talk all about the things I didn't like about it, what it's about is a woman named Elizabeth Zott. And this is set in the 60s, and she is a scientist in a very male-dominated field, and she just kind of has some problems with that. And it goes from there. Actually, maybe that's my problem. I had a tough time with like, what's the plot? There was no plot to this book. That's how it felt to me. It felt like one of those very slice of life type books that you're just kind of along for the ride and you're experiencing this person's life. My problem was I didn't love Elizabeth. As you're getting to know her and as you're following her story, you're realizing she just kind of has a unique way of looking at things. In some ways you're thinking like, oh, she's really spunky and she's pushing back against norms, right? Like where it's like, she's a woman in science. She's pushing against that. But my problem is I don't mind when there's characters that are like a bit neurodivergent, right? I actually really love that. There's some of my favorite books where I have just loved that. I'm trying to think of one. I feel like The Collected Regrets of Clover, The Maid, some of those where I just really enjoy their inner voice, their inner monologue, maybe how they think a bit different and things like that. And I'm not sure if it's just like a quirk of mine, but I don't like when scientists, women scientists, are described in this way. Like the only way they could want to be in the scientific field is if their thinking is a little atypical. And the thing is there's some just amazing women scientists who aren't neurodivergent. And I think for me, it's not the neurodivergent aspect of this. It's just the fact that why do we always have to make women in science often like that? I think that just got me. On top of the plot, like I felt like, where are we going? Because it is also about our main character starting a cooking show in the 60s. Like I think it had to do with the fact that she was having trouble in the scientific community and for some reason she got associated with this cooking show. I didn't even get to that. I think that was maybe coming. I made it 180 pages and we still weren't there, and I felt like it was a pointless book and I was getting a little upset with it. So I'm just DNFing it, even though it's very popular. And I think what I struggle with very popular books that I DNF is I'm thinking that there's gonna be something that I'm missing out on. And maybe there was, and maybe it's your favorite book and you're like, if only you would just keep reading, but I just couldn't. I couldn't keep reading, so I put it down. I DNF'd that one. To move to my 3-star books. These are also some fairly popular books. Now, I read 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. I read this as part of my buddy read for my reading challenge. It's always linked down below. This was a really fun book to read with others. It was actually a really necessary book to read with others because it's very slow for about 100 pages. And I really thought about DNFing it. I love the fact that I was reading with others because they told me to keep going. It gets better, and it does. So this is a book about our main character of January who grew up in a very kind of unique and lonely fashion. She only had her father, but he was always off working and doing some things. And so she had kind of a guardian man that she stayed at his like mansion, because this is more historical in nature. I can't quite remember time frame, but then she was drawn to kind of these doors. I mean, the book is called 10,000 Doors of January, and it's hard to explain this book. it's hard to understand it while you're reading it, to be honest, because it's just the very nature of the storytelling of these doors and traveling to different places and what these doors kind of represent. And there was a lot of like metaphor, like woven all of this stuff. But okay, so that's the general plot, if you will. I feel like initially, once I finished the book, I was like, okay, that's about a 3.5, 4 star. But since then, I've dropped it to more of a like 3, 3.5 star for a couple of reasons. One, I know I don't truly love very lyrical, beautiful writing, which the thing is I read Once and Future Witches by this author and I really enjoyed it. And it has a very similar writing style. Maybe what got me there is that was about sisters, which I have sisters, so I resonated more with that story than I did with this story. And so maybe I was able to look over that a bit more. But the writing kind of slowed me down. The confusing story, sometimes that works for me. Honestly, I can think of a number of stories where it's confusing, but it's intriguing. This was confusing, but not totally intriguing. And I think that's where I fell off with this book, but I gave that 3 stars. The other book I read that I go back and forth on my rating with is this book. So Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, another super popular book. I'm wondering if like contemporary type stories are just not my favorite. Like this might not be my kind of writing. And the hard thing is these are really popular. And this was good. This was better by all means, in my opinion, than Lessons in Chemistry. There was a plot, but at the same time, it had a meanderingness to it. It had kind of like, let's tell this story about these 2 friends over their lifetime, because it's about these 2 kids at the beginning who connected over video games. And then they started developing video games together. One of them was a girl and she was kind of before her time in the sense of female video game designers, like she wasn't as respected, which resulted in some tension between the friends. But really, it was about their friendship throughout the ages, throughout kind of life. And that was beautiful. I do like that, but the hard thing with stories like this, where it goes over, this isn't generations, but like over a lifetime, is there's always parts of the story that I just don't jive with, or I'm just like, please just communicate better. And I think that was my biggest problem with this book, was the communication. And I know it's like we're setting up flawed characters and all of these things, and they both have a backstory for why they might not communicate well. So it's not like it was bad writing or bad logic by any means. It's just an irritating aspect to the story that came up entirely too much for me to love this book. And so I highly recommend it if you're looking for an emotional, spans a person's lifetime, following a friendship, following just relationships and life. You'll really love this book. And those are the things I liked about it. So I ended up giving this like a 3.75, rounding it up to 4, because it is more in that ballpark for me. It just isn't a full 4 star just for enjoyment, because I feel like my reading in this stage of my life has a lot more to do with enjoyment than like how clever is the plot device, if that makes sense. Like I'm not picking it apart academically. It's just more of like, am I enjoying it? Which tends to, now as I'm looking at my 4 and 5 stars, they're all fantasy. They're all fantasy books, and maybe that's just the season I'm in. It probably 100% is the season I'm in. So let's just talk through some of these books then. So I have, all my 4-star books are young adult fantasy. So let's start with Caraval by Stephanie Garber. So this is definitely a well-loved book series, but this has to do with sisters. Scarlett and her sister Tessa, Tella, who at the beginning of the book really have kind of a terrible life. They don't have a mother. Their father is abusive and terrible, and they're doing everything they can to get out of the situation. And then interwoven also is like a lifetime of wanting to go to this game. It's called Caraval. It's hosted by this unique person called Legend, who has a lot of myth behind him as being like supernatural in some way. And this game has high stakes, but is it real sort of idea. And in the end, you get your wish. You get like one wish from Legend sort of idea. And so these sisters have always wanted to attend. They've always been like, I need this to get away from my father in this situation sort of idea. Now, they end up there through some circumstances that are kind of fun to read about. And they start playing. It's entertaining. I think what I really liked about this game, what I really liked about this book was the games. I liked the world. I liked how nothing was quite how it seems, and that's the fun of it, is you're not sure if this is real or not, and neither's the characters as they're going through this whole game. And so I feel like I really enjoy that in books, and I also really enjoyed how it ended. I thought it was really clever, and it's got me excited to pick up the second book in this series. And so that will probably happen here soon. So Caraval, 4 stars. As well as this book. Okay, I think I liked this one even more, to be honest. So this is Defy the Night by Bridget Kimmerer. Now this is the first book in this series. It is about a oppressed society, basically. We are in this kingdom where there has been this disease, this contagion that is running rampant, especially through the poor people, but also through the nobility. But yet there's kind of this one cure, or this one thing that helps against this illness, and it's the moonflower petals. And so then it made this whole kingdom about kind of privilege and who gets the petals and how much money do you have and all of this. And it all starts out with our main character of Tessa. This is the Tessa book. Our main character of Tessa, who is helping the poor people. She's an apothecary apprentice, so she trained under her dad as to how to like mix medicines and things like that. And so she understands how this flower works, but it's getting the flower to these poor districts where the illness is just running rampant, right? And so she takes a lot of risks. She risks her life because if she's caught stealing this flower, she could pretty much be imprisoned and executed. So it's very, very high stakes, which I really enjoyed about that. And I don't want to say too much more because there's a really fun reveal fairly early in this book that I enjoyed. I also like the character threads of the prince and the king. They're not very old. They're trying to rule this kingdom that has this illness and disease, and it's been very challenging. But in order to do that, they've been very heavy-handed and very brutal. Those storylines interact, and we're gonna leave it there. We're gonna leave it there. I enjoyed the world. I enjoyed the stakes. I enjoyed the romance. I really did, because this is romantical in nature, but it does very much stay in the YA sphere for that kind of stuff, which I enjoy. So the next one I read was this. Okay, we're just gonna go through my YA series here. I read Awakens, book 1 and book 2. I'll put book 2 up here. I forget what it's called, Fire Falling or something like that. And I read half of book 3. I just didn't finish it. I kind of reached a point where I not lost interest. I'm still interested. I just was like more obsessed with the story in these first 2 books. Like I couldn't stop reading it because it's about our main character of Valhalla. And she's been this library apprentice in this kingdom where there's this elemental type magic that is more separated. Like the people who have the magic, the sorcerers, they're in their own group and they're a little feared and a little looked down upon. And early on in this book, Valhalla learns of her magic that has not been awakened, and it becomes awakened. Awakens is the title of this book. And the struggle she goes through, especially in this first book, where she meets the Crown Prince Aldrich, who also is a sorcerer who has the magic, and he's like training her. It's a little bit of a tough relationship there because she really wants nothing to do with this world. She really liked being in the library, surrounded by books, being kind of separated from the world, and now she's being kind of thrust into some stuff. It just is fast-paced and it's good, and again, it's another YA fantasy with some romance. I really loved the world. I thought the world was really interesting. The stakes were also pretty high. I feel like, especially in the first 2 books, where you're like, whoa, that's pretty serious, and look at what she has to deal with now because of these things. And so I like the stakes. I again liked the romance. And I feel like that is usually what makes or breaks it for me for YA fantasy. Actually, all 3 of these books, it's not been like a typical love triangle type situation. It's been a very targeted romance, if you will. So I've really liked that. Another 4-star I read kind of on a whim because I was loosely participating in Romantasy-a-thon. Yes, that's what it's called. And so I picked up Quicksilver. I had it on Kindle Unlimited, and so I read it on my Kindle. And this is just such a popular book. Like, people have been talking about this. Now, this is an adult romantasy, so it's very adult, not like these books like I've been talking about. It's more in the adult sphere, so the stakes are higher and it's a little bit more brutal, if you will. And it's about our main character of, I can't remember her name, but she is a human born into another kind of oppressed society. So in this desert-y kind of region, she is in the outskirts, in these districts that's very poor and has a lot of sickness, and the queen just does not care for it at all. And there's lots of consequences for stealing and things like that. And water rations is a big deal. Like, they don't have enough water. It's pretty bad. And the rations are unfair based on society. We have our main character who is a bit spunky. She's a thief. She's just trying to make her way in the world, and she makes a bad decision that results in her being kind of brought before the queen, the scary queen, and gets a punishment of sorts. But before that kind of totally plays out, she is rescued by a man named Kingfisher, who uses like Quicksilver as like more of a gateway, like a transportation system. It makes sense within the context of the book. So he grabs her and brings her with him and saves her. Okay. But then she wakes up into the Fae world. So she was very much in the human world. No Fae, humans. And she wakes up in the Fae world, realizes he's a Fae, he's pretty scary, he's pretty morally gray, and does not like her. Really pretty much despises her, but realizes she's able to manipulate metals, which makes her very valuable. There aren't people like that anymore, and the Fae kingdom needs her, but she has no idea what's going on. So it's that classic, like, she comes in with giftings, but no way of knowing what to do with them. So she needs like training, and he helps her, and that results in some romantical tensions. Now, that's the basics of the story. What I liked about it, I liked the pacing. I thought the pacing was really good. I liked the stakes. I felt like the stakes made sense. Like, why she was doing what she was doing, why she maybe wasn't like fully invested in what they needed her to do, but compelled nonetheless, and what was the big bad out there, which will continue as this book series goes on, as they interact more outside of just kind of the singular problem of the Quicksilver and her being able to manipulate it. And so the story at the end broadened, which I thought was really interesting. That's probably one of the things that ticked it up to a 4-star for me, because the romance was the part that I liked but didn't love. I feel a bit in the minority on that. I feel like there was definitely like a chemistry about them. I feel like we learned why he behaved the way he did, all that stuff, but it still wasn't my favorite per se. Like, I feel like it didn't quite make sense why she responded to him in a romantical way. Like, I feel like I didn't buy that completely. And like I said, you learn some more things and some things make sense, but that part still didn't make sense to me. I mean, it's one of those you kind of just have to go with it, and that's totally fine. I'm okay with that. I enjoyed it. Like, it's a 4-star book. I really enjoyed it. I just don't feel like I loved it as much as some, but that's okay. The last 4-star is this book. So this is Bloodmarked, book 2 in the Legendborn cycle by Tracy Dion. You'll see Legendborn, the first one, is in my 5 stars. I'll talk about it next. But I actually made a video where I read both of these books fairly recently, and I got into all of my thoughts about them, and so I don't want to talk about it too much during this wrap up, other than the fact that it was a reread. This and Legendborn were a reread, and I enjoyed them just as much, if not more, maybe this one even more, just because they're fast reads for me. They're compelling reads. I really like our main character of Bree. I've talked a lot about this lately, so I'm trying not to, but it's an Arthurian legend story where we have our main character of Bree, who's 16 years old, ends up on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill, and her first night there, she kind of runs into magic things happening, and she gets swept into the world of the Order of the Round Table sort of idea, and the Legendborn, and I won't say more than that. I love the friendships in this book. I loved the romantic relationship in this book. So there was a bit of a love triangle, but in this book it just worked for me. I liked all 3 people in this story, and I feel like I can see where it might go, and the 3rd book is coming out so soon. Like, I think when you guys are seeing this, I might already have the 3rd book and be reading it, but I've just been really enjoying my reread and my time back in that world. So that was a 5-star. 4-star, 5-star. I think initially I might have done a 5-star, 5-star, my first rush through read, like when I read it the first time. I read it so fast, but so good. This book, 5 stars. I just finished it. I loved this book. I'm so happy that Becca from Becca and the Books is running her read along for this series, because it's pushed me to read it. Like, I had the first book, Malice. I read it end of January, Really enjoyed it. It definitely left us on a bit of a cliffhanger and I wanted to know what happened. But this book was just amazing. Like from every point in the story, because you're following a lot of characters set up in that first book, where in this world, in this kind of region, they're going to be dealing with a war of the gods. There's like a good god, a bad god, and the series is basically who's on which side. There's like a prophecy with there's going to be a person that represents the good god and a person that represents the bad god, and we're following those characters. We don't totally know who they are, especially in that first book. In the second book, you definitely do. It's not really much more of a surprise, but there's a lot of other side characters and bands of people that you're following fairly closely because it does hop points of view, and the points of view are, there's like 10 different points of view or something like that. We're following a lot of people. There's also a lot of characters to keep track of. I loved in this book, there was actually a character list at the beginning, which, I mean, since I only read it like a month prior, I was pretty good on the names, but it still really helped me out. There's also a map so you can see where all these people are going, because this is very much a war-based book. There was a lot of setup in that first book. There's a lot more fighting and war, and it took a little bit more to understand what was going on here, but I could still follow it. It was definitely a book I took my time with, which I highly recommend. It almost feels like a chess game. You're watching the different people in different parts and what they're trying to do and where will that lead next, and you're trying to see the kind of the bigger vision of this war as they're like fighting, but it's not officially the god war yet. There's also giants. I feel like I did a very bad job of explaining this book, but I highly recommend it. It's Valor by John Gwynne. I don't think I said that at the beginning because I was so excited. It's 5 stars. I can't wait to pick up the next one. So anyway, I'm gonna put that down and talk about another just like favorite. I feel like the hard thing about this is I don't know if this will be a favorite book of the year. This series probably will be though. A favorite series of the year. This book though I feel like is my favorite book so far in 2025. You guys, I loved this book. So this is Sword Catcher by Cassandra Clare. Now I wasn't quite sure how her first adult fantasy novel would go. I heard it was a bit slower, and I do enjoy her Shadowhunter world, the kind of YA world that she's built with lots of different series. I'm working my way through it and I'm enjoying it. This is better. There's a lot of character development in this book. I feel like a lot of character development, but there's also a plot buildup and lots of threads going on that you're just curious about, or at least I was. So this is about a boy named Kel, who at the beginning is an orphan and selected by the royal family as what's called the sword catcher for the prince, Prince Connor. He kind of looks similar to him. They're about the same age. And if Kel accepted this position as the sword catcher, he would learn everything with the prince. He would even learn how to mimic his movements and things like that in order to take his place in dangerous situations and potentially catch a sword for him. So he's like his bodyguard, but also he's his best friend. And I love that aspect because it was complicated too with the fact that he is not royalty, he's not nobility, he's none of those things. So does he fit? What world does he fit in? And I love that in a character, just that push and pull in his character. So I feel like it was complex in the nature of the fact that there was lots of different houses and noble people and people vying for different things politically. So it's political, we'll say that. But there was a ton of relational aspects to it because not only are we focusing on Kel and Prince Connor, we also have our main character of Lynn. So Lynn is a physician type person who is a part of a different class of people who are shunned a bit because they're the last people that have magic, but it's only a drop of magic. Like there was this thing called, I think, the Sundering, where it took all the magic from the world, but this group still has a bit of it and they can do little things. They're really good at healing type magic, and so she has trained to be a physician, even though that's not really normal for women, and she gets drawn into Kel and Connor, but she pushes against it because she views them as the reason her people are so oppressed and used. It's so good. It goes from there. This also has its sequel coming out very soon. I think the same time as Oathbound, which is the third in the Legendborn series. So I'm going to be reading those 2 books in March, no matter what, because they're just favorites. And so 5 stars. 5 stars for me. Again, I had such a fun reading month. I feel like I had a lot of just like good time quick reads, enjoyable fantasy worlds, as well as some good like thought-provoking fantasy. And then I did enjoy the more contemporary books. They're just not the ones I still think about. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not in the headspace for real world problems. That's probably it. So anyway, that's my February. Let me know. Have you read these books? Your thoughts? I know there's a couple in here that are very popular that I didn't like as much. That's okay. But otherwise, that's what I have for this video. Leave me a sword or something. There's a big battle axe here, but like a sword or weapon of some sort in the comments if you don't necessarily have anything you want to say. But otherwise, you guys, I hope you're doing well. Hope your February was amazing, and I will catch you for some March reading. All right, guys, take care.